welcome to your first day of glazing. What I have here on the table is a test tile of each of the colors that we have available to you. And on the back I've tried to write the name of the glaze, and that corresponds to the bucket. So I want just to kind of make this really clear is that I really want to make sure that you check this label on the bucket itself, okay? Kids accidentally swap the tops all the time. And so some other random color could be the lid, but you'll know if it's the right color if you check the actual bucket itself, okay? So get used to just looking at the label that's actually physically in the bucket, not the lid, okay? We've had lots of errors that way. So there's quite an arrangement of colors that you can pick from. I kind of try to do it as a spectrum. And each color has its own kind of characteristics, some little quirks or some characteristics that make it good for some things and not so good for others. So that's why this technique with your pinch pots, we're just going to apply one color and we're doing it as a dip. That's the most simple and straightforward way to apply glaze in a nice even fashion. And then throughout the semester you'll get other techniques to try out. Okay, so now I did a slightly little different version of your pinch pot, but this is what I'm going to be glazing. And over here is the glazing process. This chart helps kind of keep you organized. There are kind of a lot of things to do to a pot before you can actually glaze it, and I want you to kind of follow this plan. So I tried to make a really nice graphic organizer or pictogram that helps you stay organized. Okay. There's a couple process that we might skip over depending on a glazing technique that we're focusing on. So for example, we're going to skip the resist technique this time around, but we'll try it out on another piece. Okay. So step one is to wash your piece, and there's two ways of doing it. My preferred way is to go over to the sink and just turn on the water really quickly, rinse inside, outside, and done. Okay. What we don't want is to just hold it underneath water and let it collect water. That means that the ceramic is absorbing too much water, which means it won't absorb your glaze. And so the color that is going to go on is going to be really weak. Okay, so we just want to do a really quick and done. Okay, the idea is that we're just rinsing off the surface, and it should dry almost immediately. You can even watch the water evaporate. Okay, so that's good. The other way is to take a sponge and physically make sure the sponge is clean and wipe down the surface. Now I prefer the rinse method because sometimes their sponges are kind of gross or maybe there's clay in it, and if you don't have a clean sponge, then you're actually contaminating your surface. Okay. So while that is drying, I am going to start to make my plan, which is step two. I really strongly suggest that you bring your sketchbook into the glazing room so that you can write down what glaze you're going to pick. So this time we're just picking one color, and so you can choose whichever one you want. I've pulled out Arctic Blue as the one that I'm going to be demoing with. And so I would be writing in my sketchbook, maybe a little picture of my piece, and Arctic Blue dip. That's all. What color it is and how did I apply it. Super simple, but that's going to come back to you later. Like I'm going to have you post your picture on Seesaw when it's done and glazed, and you're going to have to say what you did and what colors you used. So it's just a way to give yourself a note. Okay. Like I said, we're going to skip the step three. I'll talk about that at another time. So step four, we're moving on, and we're going to choose our glaze, and we're going to mix it really, really well. So I picked out my Arctic Blue glaze, making sure that that's what's the label on the actual bucket. Plus, I do have some sample tiles kind of hanging off of a lot of buckets, so that it's just another way to double check you're grabbing the right color. Okay. These buckets are a little tricky to get off. If you just pull each little tab, eventually you'll get halfway through and that lid will come off. These are the best sealing lids though, so I like using them. All right, I have two mixing stations. One's right here, one's in that far corner. There's a bucket and it looks kind of messy. It's just rinse water. So whenever you're going to use the drill to help mix your glaze, I want to make sure that the drill bit itself is clean so you're not cross-contaminating your glaze that you're mixing. So you can just take your hand and kind of wipe off the drill bit, and then I'm going to put it into the mix and I'm going to mix it up. Now because this is kind of the first time we're glazing, the glazes have been sitting a little bit. I want to make sure that you're mixing for about 2 minutes. And I know that seems kind of long, but 90% of the problem with glazing is kids are not mixing their glazes well, and so that they look bad. So good 2 minutes. what I really want to make sure is that I'm getting down at the very bottom and the edges of the bucket and making sure that it's really mixed thoroughly. If you feel like there's chunks at the bottom, then we have to continue mixing. Any of that chunks at the bottom, that's the good stuff that makes the color in the glaze look so beautiful. So if you don't mix that up, you're not going to get that on your piece. Okay? Now, step 4 was to mix for about 2 minutes. And then step 5 is going to be to test your glaze. And so there's nothing toxic in our glazes, so it's fine to touch them. And that's how I have you test your glaze. If you dip your hand in there, what we're looking for is that you can see a little bit of your cuticles on your nails, or the little bit of skin underneath your nails. You can't really see the color of your skin through. You can maybe just sort of see that. So this just means that it's thick but not too thick. Okay, so you should see the definition of your nail bed, and that's what we're looking for. If it's too thick, come and talk to me. I'll have to adjust the glaze itself. If it's too thin, mix longer. You probably just didn't mix well. Okay, so this is good to go. I am ready to glaze. I'm just going to elevate this just for camera purposes. Normally I keep the buckets on the ground so you don't accidentally tip them over. Okay. When I'm ready to glaze, there's a couple things that you can use. If you have a small, narrow opening that you're not comfortable with just pouring glaze into it, you can use a funnel and pour into there. So like if your opening is really small. Okay. Otherwise, I like to glaze the inside first. And the idea with the glaze is that you want to be fairly quick and confident with your marks or your movements. So the idea is that you're pouring it in, you're rotating it, and you're dumping it out. The glaze should not be pooling in your piece. It just needs to be applied. And I like to say like 2 seconds max. Okay? So it's a quick process. And I always like to do the inside first because this sometimes happens where it just kind of makes a mess on the outside. So I can easily wipe that off with a clean sponge so that when I am ready to apply glaze on the outside, it's all even. If I was to leave all these little marks, the color could change and you could still see those drips in the end. So that's why I like to do the inside first. Now that's fairly clean. I didn't get all of it off, but I'm going to be coloring it the same color, so it's not that big of a deal. Okay. So inside is done first. We just wait to make sure that it's not shiny on the inside. It should be fairly dry, and then I can go ahead and do the second dip, or the outside dip. And I like to use these dipping tongs, and it's just going to clamp onto your piece, and I'm just going to submerge it in, and it might sneak into the inside, so I'm going to probably have to pour it out and just kind of let it drip. Okay? Again, try to do it within 2 seconds. Just let it drip. And while you're watching it, you should probably start to see it dry a little bit. It might take a little time. Some people can do the inside and the outside at the same time. That's okay. If you feel like your piece is fairly easy to go at an angle and get the inside and outside together, that's fine. And some people prefer to do inside first, then outside. So after I apply the glaze, I might need to do a little touch-up. So I'm just waiting until it's starting to dry. And the very bottom of my piece, I can't have any glaze on. So I'm just going to wipe that off, and I can set it down on the table. And if I feel like I need a touch-up, there's some brushes right over here. And normally I can use either the glaze that's on my tongs, or if I use my hands, I can use what's ever left on my hands to just touch up those little marks. Okay. Then I'm going to just kind of clean up my tools and return those. And the last thing is just to make sure that the foot is clean and free of glaze. So now this is not shiny. It looks dry and powdery, so I can touch it. And my foot looks pretty good. There's not glaze wherever it touches. And I like to make sure that it's not going to get ruined. I'm going to wipe just a little bit up the edges. I like to say about 1/4 of an inch up the edges of the side. And that's in case if your glaze, when it melts, it could move, it could run on you. And just by wiping off a little bit extra, if it moves, it's not going to fuse to the shelf and break your piece. When you're done with anything that's glazed, we take it into our kiln room. And there is a shelf, a wire shelf right here, and you just place your piece there. If you feel like it's a little tippy, you can bring a board and put it on the board just so that it's nice and stable. But anything in here I know is complete, and whenever I'm ready to fill a kiln, I know that this is the stuff that I can fill it with. Okay. If you don't finish, right back on the other side of the room, there is the not finished